So we're now going to take a look at how we can factorise something like this. Now, this is going to look quite odd to us because in the previous examples we've had three terms. We've had an x squared, which this one has, then we've had a something times x, and then we've got this minus 4. So we're missing a term in the middle. Now, I could write this as x squared plus 0x take away 4, if you prefer. Okay, and then what we would be thinking about is, okay, well, really here I'm looking for two numbers then that multiply together to make minus 4, but add together to make 0. Okay, so two numbers that multiply together make minus 4, but add together to make 0. Okay, well, two numbers that multiply together make minus 4. One's got to be positive, one's got to be negative in order to get a negative 4. So we've either got 1 and 4, so we've got 1 times minus 4, or minus 1 times 4, or 2 times minus 2. Or minus 2 times 2, doesn't matter which way round that is. But the only ones here that are going to add together to make 0 would be the 2 and the minus 2. They make 0. So this must factorise. Let me erase that properly. That must factorise to x plus 2, x minus 2. Okay, now we refer to this because you've got two squares here. So I could write this as x squared take away 2 squared. Okay, we refer to this as, because we've got two squares and we're subtracting, so we're finding the difference, we refer to it as the difference of two squares. So this is the difference of two squares. Okay, and what you're looking out for here is for this number to be a square number. Okay, now of course you can kind of get around that. So for those of you thinking, well, what if it's not a square number? Just as a very, very quick aside, if you had x squared take away 3, for example, then what this is, that 3 is actually the square root of 3 all squared. Okay, you could write it like that. It doesn't look very nice. You could theoretically then write that as x take away root 3, x plus root 3. By theoretically, you could write it like that. How useful that's going to be is another matter. Okay, so just to be aware, but you could theoretically do that. So what we're then looking for is the square root of the value that you've got there. So let's say in another example, let's get rid of that. Let's say we've got x squared, and it's got to be takeaway here in order for us to factorise it, because it's got to be a difference. Okay, so x squared take away 9, let's say. Well, 9 is 3 squared, isn't it? So thinking about it as x squared take away 3 squared. So that means we would have x take away 3, x plus 3. And it doesn't matter which order I write those brackets in. I could have done x plus 3, x minus 3. But we wanted two numbers that would multiply together to make minus 9, but add together to make 0. And that's the 3 and the minus 3. So that's how it works. Now, before we get into examples, it is best to see this in a generic form, okay, before we go any further, because I don't want you just looking at this structure and thinking it's always going to be of that form. What if we had something like 9 take away x squared? What if it was that way round? Okay. Can we do the same thing? Well, yes. Yes, we can. And this is where we don't want to really think about necessarily thinking about it in this way anymore. What we really want to do is go, we've got a square number, we've got a square number. We are subtracting them, so it's the difference. So the square root of 9 is 3. The square root of the x squared is x. So we would have to have 3 take away x and 3 plus x. So it's the two numbers square rooted. You've got the 9 being square rooted to 3, the x squared square rooting to the x. So you've got 3x, 3x. So you can kind of think of it like this initially. Okay. And then one of them's got to be plus, one of them's got to be take away. And it doesn't matter which way around you do it. Okay? And so this is how we can do that difference of two squares. In actual fact, we can generalise it to anything squared. So let's say a squared take away b squared. So the two brackets would both have a and b in them. One of them's a plus, one of them's a minus. Okay? So this allows you to spot any difference of two squares and factorise it straight off the bat. Okay? Now, this is going to take some practice, and it's really kind of like tuning your brain into seeing those two terms and thinking, right, squared term, I'm subtracting them, difference of two squares, it can immediately go into this format. Okay? And that's what the next videos are there to do, so we can really train ourselves to spot these.